Hi, this is Brooke Barber. This is my How Do You Know assignment for psychology. So let's just jump into it. Okay, so quick overview. The assignment was to read a list of questions to people, but every now and then you phrase them a little differently and we're trying to find a pattern in the way they answer and try to notice and understand what it is that backs up their answers and the reason that they answer that way. One of the main things I noticed was that the younger the people were, the more, or the harder it was to understand their critical thinking, the harder it was for them to back their information up because they just thought they were right. It's just, there was no point in wondering. And the older the people were that I interviewed, the better their critical thinking was, the better experiences they had, and the more they understood these things. I also noticed that a lot of the older people kind of saw the effect of Facebook more, in their opinion, as being negative, as tearing people down. You know, you can't hear the emotion in people's voice, you can't see the look in their eyes, there's no body language, you just read the words in whatever tone of voice you want. Whereas the younger people I interviewed, they're like saying, oh yeah, definitely, it boosts your self-confidence, definitely you're always in the loop, you're always talking to your friends like it's a good thing. So that, I think, is one of those big things where it just depends on your point of view on it, and maybe there's no real answer for that one. It's just a big opinion question. I'd definitely say one woman, she's my favorite to interview just because of the way she was trying to back her answers up. Where the question, why is it that people act different during a full moon? Why they have odd behavior during a full moon? She was ready for that one. She had this big, long, maybe 5-minute explanation of how it's the same way that sun can affect you. If you're out in the sun too long, it just wears you out. The moon does the same thing, only the moon's rays affect your sleep cycle, and in the end it just messes with your head and it just causes you to act strange, and it does it to everybody. It's hard for me not to correct her on that one, but it was a good way to change my perspective because she was the only one that actually took that into thought. Everyone else was just like, no, I don't think it does, or it doesn't. Maybe it's just like that power of suggestion. So that was definitely an interesting one. You could tell when some people were wrong just because they weren't really sure. They just knew you needed an answer. So they just kind of put something out there, and then how we've been studying it in class for so long, we know the right answers. I know the right answers, so it was just interesting, some of the things that people would say, and it definitely depended on the person. Using my critical thinking supplement, yeah, some of them were off. Some of their explanations just made no sense, had nothing to do with anything. Sometimes they would kind of pick a piece of the question to answer, and I'd have to re-ask it, kind of get their head back to what the actual question was. Concepts like confirmation bias, hindsight bias, and overconfidence effect definitely played a big role in the way people answered. Like, when they thought they were right, they were right. There's no going back, and at the end of it, especially with my family members, whereas I was still with them at the end, I didn't have anywhere to go. I was kind of talking to them about it, and they didn't believe me even when I would kind of tell them some of the right answers. They were sure they were right. They were sure there was some reason they were right. Just because I believed differently didn't make them any any less wrong, any more wrong. But, so they definitely played a big role in it. I think that sometimes people have these erroneous beliefs just because it's that power of suggestion. It just depends on the people that they're around, what their influences in their life, what those people believe. Sometimes it's easier to believe some things for some people than it is for others. Like the woman who believed that, yeah, the moon does affect the way that you act. She was totally okay with believing that. It didn't bother her at all. But other people, it kind of freaked them out. I had an aunt. It stressed her out just a little to think about it because the way the question was worded implied that it does have an effect on us, and she had a hard time wrapping her brain around that, trying to understand. Maybe she acts weird during a full moon and she just had never noticed. There was definitely a pattern in the way that people responded, depending on the way that I asked the questions, affected the way they answered. I think that if I had asked, why do opposites attract? Do opposites attract? If I'd asked the question differently than it was written down, their answers would have been different. Because when I ask them on the implication that it's true, they feel like they need to back it up. Whereas if I ask them, what their opinion on it, they can go either way. And so it was a definite eye-opener to see people's different opinions. You know, a lot of people knew what psychology was for the most part. Some people, to them, psychology just makes them think like mental health treatment. That's all a psychologist is. They didn't really understand that there's more to it than that, especially the younger ones. And then I think sometimes people kind of knew generally what psychology was, but they had a hard time, you know, backing that up with any facts that they knew or anything they knew about psychology. But for the most part, I think people kind of got this pretty well. The people I interviewed knew what was going on. You know, they all have their own personal opinions, like on the Facebook or global warming and who's going to win the election. For them, for that one, it was a harder one because they knew who they wanted to win, and then they had who they thought would win, and it was like a battle that raged within their own minds. But it was just interesting to see people's different perspectives on all these questions. And I definitely think that a pattern emerges just depending on how you phrase it and who the person is. But yeah, that's what I got out of this assignment.